This lesson is about continuing to work on your contour line project. And what we're going to cover today is deciding if you are finished with your composition, the layout of your hands, if you need more drawings. And we're also going to look at how you start the final stages of your drawing, which is to ink it. So for this assignment, you are going to need a pen or a fine line marker. I actually recommend a Sharpie, and sorry, this is not Sharpie, a Paper Mate Flair pen. It's a pretty skinny tip marker, although it's not permanent. You could use a ballpoint pen if you don't have any other option. You could also use a gel pen, so one that uses like a more of a solid black ink rather than a ballpoint pen. The other thing you could use is like a micron or kind of a fancier felt tip pen. I do not recommend using a Sharpie fine point. The reason is that this usually bleeds, so I don't recommend that, but any of these options are just fine. So before you move on, what you want to do is decide if your composition is finished. So what you're going to think of and ask yourself is, have you filled most of the space? So what we are looking at is this negative space. And we want to make sure that your hands drawings and the object drawings are filling about 3/4 of the space. So if you look at my piece right here, I am not finished. I have a lot of empty space here. Also, it's not balanced because it's more crowded over here and less crowded over here. The other thing I see is I have a lot of space on both of these edges and these edges where I've not gone off, had any drawings go off the edges. So before I move on to the next step in my final drawing, I am going to add a few more drawings. So that doesn't, for right now, I'm going to go ahead and show you though what the next step is. In order to do this next step, you are going to need to flip back to one of your hand drawings that you did, one of the last hand drawings you did before we started the project. So this was just a regular contour line drawing. Here I have it started partially. What we are going to be adding to all of your drawings with that pen or marker is called line weight changes or line weight variety. So when we talk about line weight, we can look at, I just want you to look at this drawing, and what I am noticing is that the weight is basically the thickness of the line. So when I look at this drawing, all the line weight or all the thickness is about the same all over the drawing. What we want to do is we want to add some changes in the line weight, and we're going to do that with our pen or marker. When we do that, maybe you'll be able to see side by side here, we're going to be creating lines that go from thick and then change to thin and then go back to thick, and they do it very gradually. So the line weight or the thickness has variety because it's changing and because it's doing gradually. It's doing gradual, it's doing smooth, it's doing noticeably. So the concept, and I'm just going to have you practice on one of these drawings, and you don't have to take a picture and turn this in. You can just go straight apply it to your final project. What I would have you do first is just to draw a wavy line. So line weight changes we can do in a lot of different ways. You can do it when you're drawing. So when you're drawing and you use a really light touch and then you press down harder and then you bring it back up, that gives a natural line weight change. However, in this case, we are probably going to be adding artificial line weight, and that just means that you draw over the line. So you draw the line once, and then you go and you add thickness afterwards. And you do that by just building up next to like the outside or inside of a curve. So for this, I have added it. And you're going to kind of notice, compared to the one where I just pressed harder or lighter, I am able to make it more noticeable from a distance. So the reason that we add line weight changes to drawings is to make it more interesting or have variety, but it's also to give the appearance of a three-dimensional object. It almost creates like a shadow, which causes us to look at a very flat drawing and make it look more three-dimensional. So there's my single weight. Here is mine with the line weight variety or line weight changes. So that's what I'm going to be asking you to practice on your hand drawing. So the very first hand drawing I have here, I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit. I have gone over and made that pretty bold, but I am going to start first by just tracing over all my lines with my marker. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide exactly where I am going to add some thicker parts to my line. So I said when I was doing this, it's easiest to do this on the outside or inside of a curve. So for instance, I could come to the outside of the curve here, and I could draw right next to it a couple times, and then I could have it go back to be the thickness that it was originally. One thing that's important as you're adding these line weight changes is that you want the added part to echo the original part. So for instance, this is a nice gradual curve. I do not want to make all of a sudden a drastic curve. I don't want it to look like my line has a wart growing on it, or that this is a snake that just ate, I don't know, a large mouse. So we want to avoid this quick change. We want to have a gradual change. So I'm going to do that just by adding to the outside and then gradually having it taper back in, taper up, taper back in. Now, one thing I said is you want it to echo the same curve. So that means if I'm doing the outside of a curve, it's curving out, I don't want to all of a sudden add line weight that goes the complete opposite direction. So these, don't do those. You want it gradual and smooth and flowing. So once you practice here, you're going to then go apply it on your artwork. Now here's just a note, you don't want to make all the lines thick everywhere. You want some areas to be thicker. So I'm going to zoom back out. I am going to flip back to my artwork, which was in the back here. And now I'm going to show you how I would apply it on these drawings. So right here I have a very sketchy line. So I'm going to first make my line smooth by inking in just a single weight line. And I'm going to keep the same amount of detail that I had before. Then I'm going to start to add some line weight changes. So here is a part that I could just really gradually start to make thicker. Then the thicker I get, the longer it's going to take for me to taper it back down and make it thinner. So some of the line I'm going to keep the original thickness. Some of the line I'm going to make much thicker, and some of the line it's going to be kind of a medium thickness. So here I'm going to go along here, thick to thin. Now when I'm completely finished with this process, I am going to take my eraser, and this is part of good craftsmanship. I do want to wait until the ink is completely dry. I am going to go ahead and erase all my pencil lines from my initial drawing. So that is one of the reasons I asked you to draw or sketch so lightly on your planning stages, because eventually you want to ink over all your lines and not have any of those pencil lines or smudges visible. So that is the next step of your project. You finish your composition, you make sure it's balanced, that you're filling most of the space, practice some line weight changes, and then you can apply it to your artwork. Now just a note, if you are going to do this with a pen, you can, that's fine, a regular pen, but with pens it tends to get a little scratchy or rough looking. So if you're going to use a ballpoint pen, you certainly can. It's going to take a little bit more work to make it noticeable so that you build up a thick enough area before tapering back down. So that is a ballpoint pen. Here is a gel pen. I prefer gel pens because generally they will give you a smoother appearance. This one is almost out of ink. So that is the next step in your project. I call it the inking phase, where you add line weight changes.